Of course, I'm Leslie Mack, a registered dietitian with Harmony Nutrition, and excited to be here today to talk a little bit about ditching the food guilt in general and or for the holidays. I think most of it comes up a lot more for us during the holidays, so I think this is a very aptly timed webinar. And if you'll go to the next page for me, or the next slide, excuse me. All right, so a little bit about Harmony Nutrition. We are a dietetic practice group that truly believes that a body in harmony performs at its best. We really work and prioritize the individual and all of the individual's nutrition concerns. And our team is committed to listening to each patient's story and really working to partner with them on the journey. Our dietitians cover over 12 specialties in-house, including but not limited to, I just highlighted some that might be relevant for today, but eating disorders, sports nutrition, of course, gastrointestinal concerns, women's health, and then we also cover, of course, diabetes, heart health, autoimmune, allergies, and food sensitivities, that type of thing as well. What makes Harmony unique is we are in network with most major insurance providers, and so we are covered in most insurance plans in full for our nutrition counseling. And we offer virtual and in-person appointments as well. And we offer virtual in about 38 states, including New York. Shout out to those on the call. So if interested in meeting with a dietitian that is covered by most insurance plans, we're a great stop for that. We cover all ages. And so we do anywhere from newborn up to senior or late in life. And more information, of course, is on our website at harmonynutritiontherapy.com. And I should have said and mentioned, of course, we are located in Decatur in Clarity Fitness as one of our locations. And then we also have an Alpharetta and Sandy Springs office too. Okay, all right, so let's get into it. So I thought I'd start a little bit with food guilt, which I think is a very umbrella term for a lot of things and feelings and thoughts around food. But I thought it might be important to highlight a little bit about where food guilt can stem from. And I know this is a little bit on the therapy side, but I do also feel like it's very important and relevant to think a little bit about why we have thoughts or why we are feeling the way we feel about food, right? And so I think for a lot of us, guilt around food can definitely stem from body image or desirability for body image change. Definitely can be promoted by a lot of diet culture and
Sorry.
That's okay, you're okay. By diet culture and diet language. And so I think we hear a lot from diet culture about good, bad foods, right? Things we should and should not be eating. Of course, our lovely social media images and messaging promote a lot of interesting relationships around food, but definitely promote a less is more type of mentality. Food scarcity and food insecurity are also a big cause for food guilt, right? Kind of ability to have or have not is a big factor, but also can cause us to feel bad for eating sometimes, right? When we have the food, and then also can make us feel bad when we don't have the food. So that is a big one for a lot of us, especially in this current climate. Food waste or fear of food waste is another big one around food guilt, right? Finishing our plate versus not finishing our plate, that type of vibe. And then, of course, childhood food environment. What was the language in our home growing up around food? And of course, body image being a big factor here for some as well. And so, like I said, I think this is helpful to kind of think about a little bit about how one or more of these might be playing a role in the food relationship. And that helps us a little bit with the reframe or how we can change that relationship. Okay, ready for the next slide. Thank you. So these are just some food for thought questions. Again, I realize this is not a therapy topic. However, it does hit with a lot of our emotional relationship with food, right? And so I think it's important to reflect a little bit of what do you achieve with food guilt? Are there any pros to it? And I say this kind of somewhat sarcastically, but also what are we getting out of it? What do we get out of feeling bad about what we eat or judging ourselves for eating a cupcake or not, right? And then I like to think a little bit about how food guilt affects your food behaviors overall, right? I'll talk a little bit more to this in the next slide. And lastly, what would be one or two things you'd want to change around food guilt? And this is something a dietitian can definitely work with you on, and or therapy as well. But definitely in our food space, we kind of work to identify this, the pros and cons, and how can we reshape that food relationship. Thank you. So some of the things that we see food guilt contributing to. One of the biggest things I think I see is the inconsistent eating patterns, right? So we have guilt, this kind of restrict or overconsume cycle that I see, right? So it's something of perhaps I'm not going to be eating sweets for the next week, right? And so we restrict or eat less of that food item. And then once we are exposed next to that food item that we are trying to restrict, we tend to overconsume that exact item, right? And so this leads to really that imbalance of intake patterns versus finding a more consistent, enjoyable pattern, right? Of I'll have a piece of chocolate here and there and keep it moving, right? Another big thing we see are compensatory behaviors, right? Feeling the need to kind of get rid of food. And of course, these can be extreme, like purging or laxative use sometimes, but we also see this with exercise, right? Like, oh goodness, I ate a cookie, I got to work out extra hard at the gym tomorrow, right? Or sometimes those compensatory behaviors might be restricting, right? Like I overate, now I'm not going to not eat again till later tomorrow or whatever that might be. Physical changes. I think these are some of the most amplified pieces that really affect our overall health, right? So we see a lot of imbalance in energy or low energy patterns with food guilt based on some of those inconsistent eating patterns I highlighted just now. Also, we see a lot of that food mood connection, right? When feeling bad or feeling bad about what we did, it might cause us to compensate. Compensate for what we ate or feel in a lower mood overall. But also, we see the flip side, right? Sometimes when we're in a good mood or bad mood, it can really influence our food and food choices and also contribute a little bit to that high low energy, adjusted metabolism, right? And one of the big things we see is also effects of digestion or gastrointestinal distress, right? Sometimes those imbalance of patterns can really lead to constipation, bloating, right? Abdominal discomfort, those type of things as well. And then can also alter our food relationship, of course, right? It can increase cravings or desirability for the exact foods we feel guilty about eating, right? It can also cause us to hyper focus on specific foods when we're thinking, I'm not going to eat carbs or carbs are bad, right? It can tend to have the brain be like, all I want are carbs. And of course, it can cause a lot of that guilt and shame with our food relationship that can really lead to that inconsistent eating pattern I mentioned earlier. So we see a lot of negatives with food guilt and maybe not as many positives, right? So how can we reduce food guilt? And you can keep scrolling. Thank you so much. So I was thinking of kind of some general ideas and then we'll get more into kind of some specifics. But in the world of food acceptance, really working on reframing or adjusting how we view food as good or bad, right? Of course, we know that there are a lot of foods that have naturally more nutrient quality than others, right? Obviously, an orange versus a Cheeto are going to be two different things. However, when we think of things as more, I can have these whenever I want and I can feel comfortable with how I'm including those in my day to day, that really starts creating a different experience, right? And so that food acceptability or that mentality to say all foods can fit is a really important mindset to start working towards. Okay. And this kind of comes to that next one of reframing through thoughts. A lot of times when we're eating certain foods, especially those foods that we feel guilty, like sweets or carbohydrates tend to top the list for many, instead of sitting with the thought of, I shouldn't be eating this, I shouldn't be doing this, what about reframing to, what do I like about this food? What tastes good about this food? What brings me joy about eating this food, right? And really start to challenge a little bit of those negatives into a awareness or, if possible, a positive. Okay. I think this is also a very important point is the identifying diet culture language. We are fed a lot of messages around food, body image, and other things. And I think it almost trains the brain into naturally thinking about that way without questioning or challenging when we're in a more negative food space. So when we hear language like less is more or clean versus processed, that's a lot of diet culture language. And so maybe just reframing or identifying to say, oh, I think that's a little bit of my diet culture brain or restrictive brain or however you want, food guilt brain talking. I think identifying gives us some space to make different choices instead of just kind of naturally allowing that thought process to happen. And then lastly, embracing hunger and cravings. I think what's so interesting is as humans, we sometimes get the messaging that feeling hungry is bad or we shouldn't be feeling hungry. And we often seek out things that suppress appetite for a lot of us. And this can get really tricky as far as physical hunger. And when we get to more physical hunger or more extreme physical hunger, it's very hard to control food choices, and experience, or excuse me, eating experience. And so I think really understanding that hunger is normal and natural, and acknowledging your early hunger and satisfying that is important. I also think there's a lot of value in embracing cravings, right? It is natural to crave certain foods. I realize there are more extreme craving patterns that some of us might experience, and that's definitely a space for a nutrition counseling appointment. But I think as a whole, if I want a cookie here and there, that should be okay to have, right? And so I think it's acknowledging that and choosing that instead of maybe choosing three other fruit sweet items before I get to the cookie, right? And before I know it, I'm still back at the cookie, right? So and thank you, Mimi, for understanding that. I feel like that hits for a lot of us. Okay, so I thought it would be really important before I go into the next slide to highlight this hunger fullness scale, right? I mentioned a little bit of that early hunger, extreme hunger, and same goes for that early fullness or extreme fullness. A hunger fullness scale is generally just a new numeric tool to help us kind of quantify where we fall as far as hunger fullness. And you'll notice in that mid-range, the 3 to 7, that's kind of the starting to feel hungry and starting to feel full range. The goal is to keep this as consistent in this 3 to 7 range throughout the day, right? This satisfies physical hunger and keeping energy consistent, metabolism consistent throughout the day, and allows us to be less stimulated by extreme hunger or instinct for food choice, right? So when we're more consistently fed and fed on a balanced diet, and we'll talk a little bit about this next, or excuse me, a balanced eating pattern, we're more likely to satisfy both sides of this coin, leading to less of that restrict overconsume pattern. However, you'll notice at more of the extremes of this scale, the overly hungry side, right? That very hungry, ravenous. When we get into that state, it's very difficult to make solid food decisions. Oftentimes, we're going to choose whatever's convenient, available, or nearby. And we're less likely to have a full sensory engagement of the eating experience, right? It's generally a faster pace of eating, kind of eating wherever you're getting the food, in the car, whatever that might be. And we're more likely with that fast pace of eating to miss or pass through that starting to feel full, right? That 6 or 7. And we tend to hit right at that overly full 8, kind of a little bit too full or uncomfortably full. And for most of us, when we are in the extreme uncomfortably full, what happens next? Now I'm going to wait a long time to not eat again, right? So those extremes can very much self-perpetuate. So eating consistently, especially at this early hunger range, is especially important for helping balance kind of energy and the mindset around food. Okay. And so some pieces and tips and tricks of this puzzle are highlighted here. I thought it very important to put intuitive eating, right? The mindset of intuitive eating is increasing your food acceptability, right? Decreasing that good, bad food judgment, and realizing that all foods can fit at any time. I think for a lot of people, they often take that as I can eat a pack of cookies every day, or that sounds more of an overconsumption mindset. But actually, the goal is to be able to include foods that sound good in the moment in a sensory and enjoyable or mindful eating experience, and being able to be comfortable with the portion and enjoyment of the food choice and keep it moving. And that ideally is a positive food relationship, right? I can have a cookie here and there. It doesn't derail my whole day or my whole week, and I'm still nourishing my body and enjoying what I'm eating. And that's a little bit of a very brief overview of the mindset around intuitive eating, but it's a beautiful place to explore. I mentioned the mindful eating already, but this is a little bit about that eating experience and being engaged. I'll hit on this in just a second. Consistency of intake, much like I highlighted in that hunger fullness scale, when we eat consistently generally for most of us, consistent intake or satisfying early hunger generally occurs about every 4 to 5 hours throughout the day, right? And so when we're able to eat consistently and feeding that early hunger, we are less or more likely, to satisfy that physical hunger and have a little bit of intensity around that mental hunger. So this is a really beautiful way to balance a little bit of that food guilt and or food acceptance piece. Balance of intake or what we're eating is also super important, right? It's not to say every meal has to have a protein and a carbohydrate and fat, although that is ideal, but not always doable. But I think what's really important is try to incorporate some other pieces of the puzzle, right? Making sure you have carbohydrate represented, making sure you have your protein represented, and of course, some fiber, so we can really satisfy the full meal and physical hunger piece. This is also a very interesting place to explore as far as a balanced meal. I find oftentimes with food guilt or guilty foods, if we want to put it in that category, guilty pleasures, we often try to push them off or wait, or most of us eat them later in the day or end of day, almost evening time. That pattern hits for a lot of people. What could be a very interesting exercise is intentionally incorporating a sweet item with your lunch a couple days a week, right? With a balanced meal. It can create a very different food relationship versus I'm going to try not, try not, try not, and then I quote unquote give in, right? Versus I'm going to have it, I'm going to include it with a balanced meal, and I'm going to keep it moving. Enjoyable food selection. I think that this is very important. I often refer to this as satiety or enjoyment of what we're eating. If we're not enjoying what we're eating, it's very hard to not have your mind drift to some other food choices, right? So trying to aim for a variety of foods and meals, right? Trying to aim for a variety of carbohydrates and proteins, right? And really choosing what sounds good in the moment, or if we're meal planning, what might sound good in the moment, right? And so I think that food variety and appreciation and enjoyment of food plays a big role in that overall food relationship. And then, of course, the mindful eating experience. And I guess I kind of highlighted this on here twice, but really engaging your senses, right? Being present with the eating experience, plating it, making it in on or in a container that is enjoyable to eat out of, or a plate that looks nice, right? That's why I like this picture here with the cookies and the like decor, right? It's a vibe. And we eat with our eyes first. So really making sure to plate food, whether it's a meal or a sweet or a combination of sweets, right? That would be really beautiful to aim for. I think what's also very enjoyable is slowing down and taking time to actually chew the food. I think sometimes those guilty foods or guilty pleasures, we kind of want to eat really quickly and kind of get down and get it over with type of thing. But if we took some time to chew, taste, slow down, and really enjoy the experience, it actually helps naturally balance portion control a little bit of those foods. Okay. And not to say you have to eat less or more or whatever, but just to be present and engaged and be like, okay, maybe I only needed one Hershey kiss instead of two, right? So really, really taking in that sensory, the flavors, the textures, the temperatures, that vibe is a beautiful place to find that enjoyment and satiety of that eating experience. So those are just some general tips and tricks around that food relationship and reducing some of the guilt and increasing more of that food acceptance. Okay. This is kind of my closing slide, and then I'll kind of open up to any questions if we have them. But first of all, thank you for letting me be here today. I feel like this is such a topic, of course, important for the holidays, but I feel like things that affect a lot of us throughout the year as well, and are always wonderful to bring attention to from a different light. If you're interested in connecting with us, of course, we're on Instagram with Harmony Nutrition ATL. Our website is listed there at harmonynutritiontherapy.com. I put our email and our phone number as well. And if you're interested in scheduling an appointment or anything like that, all of our specialty areas are listed on our website. All of our dietitian team is on there as well. And so we'd love to hear from you. So thank you for letting me be here today.